Good afternoon, everybody. We want to apologize for some technical issues that we had previously, but we're ready to roll here now, and we thank you for joining us as we outline ISAC's 2018 legislative priorities. With me is another member of the ISAC legislative team, Lucas Binken, and so we will walk through we'll give you some background before we get into the priorities of the legislative policy development process, and that's driven by the Legislative Policy Committee, the LPC, and it was chaired by ISAC Second Vice President Eric Stearman, who is the Dubuque County Treasurer. And it consists of 32 members, 2 from each affiliate, and then they basically deliberate over the legislative objectives, and then they basically provide, they meet twice a year, once in August to review the proposals from each of the affiliates, and then again in September to make recommendations to the full membership and ultimately to the board on what our legislative platform shall be. And these are the members of the LPC for this year. And so to go through the process here, the LPC develops the policy statements and the legislative objectives. And often we get questions about what's the difference between a policy statement and a legislative objective. And a policy statement is a long-term or continuing statement of principles, mostly pertaining to local control and local government authority and how county government can work efficiently. And basically what they do is they provide us guidance for Lucas and I when specific pieces of legislation come up with that aren't a part of our legislative objectives. And our legislative objectives are specific pieces of legislation to address specific problems, and we take these to legislators to get these drafted, and then we actively pursue these bills to make sure that they get passed. And then ultimately from those objectives, the top priorities are put together. And then we meet with legislative leadership prior to session to outline these priorities. And so, as I said before, in September, the LPC recommended the priorities to the ISAC membership. And then October, we had a legislative webinar. And then for the first year, we had online voting. And so the online voting for our priorities and to approve our policy statements as well went between October 11th and October 25th. And then based on those results and the work of the LPC, then in November at the ISAC board meeting, the board ratified the legislative priorities and set the top priorities during the board meeting. And right now we're having the legislative webinar and the rollout of the top priorities. And then after that, we will be reaching out to key legislators, committee chairs, and also the legislative leadership in both chambers and also the governor's office. And so the top 4 priorities as set by the ISAC board are mental health and disability services, secondary roads, tax reform, and water quality management. The first one, mental health and disability services, this certainly has been a long time priority for ISAC, and it's been addressed on and off through the years, most specifically last year with the passage of Senate File 504, which did get rid of the 1996 individual county caps and set new regional caps. While it did free up as far as giving levy equity within the regions, we still are in the need for a long-term funding solution. And also there are some things that were passed in the legislation in spending down of the cash reserves over 3 years, and so that is going to be problematic in the next coming years and needs to be addressed as well. And so that's why we will be pushing, as a part of Senate File 504 that passed last year, there was a call for after the 2018 legislative session that there would be an interim to look at possible changes to this legislation. And so we were going to be actively pushing for that. And so the other additional things that we'll be pushing for this session pertaining to mental health and disability services is provide adequate levels of services outside the correctional system. And this is including the necessary number of psychiatric beds. And the big thing about that is they need to be the right beds, not only acute, subacute, but also to meet the needs of children. And then also to provide incentives to address the severe lack of mental health professionals in Iowa, especially in our rural areas. And lastly, provide sufficient funding for the effective implementation of a children's mental health and disability services program. There's certainly been task force in years past, of which ISAC has been a part of it, pertaining to children's mental health, and I know the counties and the regions they want to see these invested in, and so the big thing is we need to have the sufficient resources for the children's mental health program if we decide to move forward with that. And next, we'll go with Lucas.
Our second top priority is on secondary roads. We've had a good couple of years. 2015, as you recall, the gas tax was increased, and last year we were successful in getting the federal aid swap legislation passed. This year we're going to continue our focus on secondary roads, something very important to counties, as we're responsible for about 3/4 of both our road miles in Iowa and our bridges in Iowa. So first, we would like to maintain the cap of $225 million on time 21. Second, we would like to see the state sales excise tax on fuel also be applied to dyed fuels for agricultural vehicles. And finally, we would like to explore the use of fees for high impact industries such as hydraulic fracking operations, wind turbine farms, and large-scale agricultural buildings like animal feeding operations. Our third top priority is tax reform. First and foremost, we'll be working to ensure that the backfill is fully funded again this year. This is currently a standing limited appropriation, but as with any appropriation, the legislature could change that. So we will be reminding legislators of the promise that was made in 2013 and their buy-in as part of Senate File 295 to fund the backfill for the loss to local governments for the reduction of taxable value for commercial and industrial property. We would also like to decouple agricultural buildings from agricultural land. The addition of ag buildings, because of the productivity formula, provides a net zero in increase in taxable value because the county-wide limits on ag value is limited. So while new buildings are added and there's additional pressure on resources and additional wear and tear on county roads, there's no new revenue to offset that. So decoupling would provide for more revenue, and that could be used for the secondary road system in particular. Next, we'd like to decouple ag and residential property classes for purposes of the growth limitation. This was put in place in the 1970s because of rapidly growing or expanding residential property values, but that has probably outlived its usefulness and has artificially put limits on how quickly the residential property class can grow. So we would like to decouple ag and residential and let each of those classes rise and fall with the market as they stand alone. Next, we would like to establish a bottom limit for the assessment growth limitation for ag and residential property. Currently, there's an upper limit of 3% growth limitation each year, but there's no lower limit. So putting in place a lower limit would reduce the likelihood of a large market drop-off, negatively affecting the taxable value when the assessed value declines rapidly. And finally, we would like to increase the state sales tax by 1 cent. Jamie will talk here momentarily about the first 3/8 of a cent, which is dedicated to the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, but the remaining 5/8 of a cent could be used for property tax reduction in the form of the state picking up some of the funding of our mental health and disability services, and some additional revenue from that sales tax increase could be used for income tax relief, which appears to be a priority of of the legislature this coming year.
All right, and our last priority is on water quality management. As Lucas talked about just before here, that we are pushing for at least an increase of 3/8% in the state sales tax that would go to fund the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, or IWIL, and then also then to maintain the distribution formula that's found in Iowa Code Chapter 461, and that was passed in relation to the 2010 vote by Iowans on the constitutional amendment. And as you can see below, it breaks down in terms of the allocations for the various areas of which various programs will be funded as a result of this trust fund. Next is certainly on additional things for water quality improvement is to identify additional financial resources to address water quality improvements, and they would be in the form of revolving loans, investments in wastewater treatment, and to address the nutrient management strategy on farm practices. And then to implement these programs, we are recommending that they are implemented and funded through a network of statewide watershed authorities through the effective use of 28E agreements. Now, these watershed authorities can provide coordination of efforts in specific regions of the state, including up and down the entire watershed. And then finally, pass legislation that would support and encourage public sector entities such as counties to be involved in water mitigation projects that can involve county conservation boards and boards of supervisors. And this would provide investments in flood mitigation, as we've seen recently on the West Coast in the Missouri River, and most recently in the Cedar River over in Cedar Rapids. And next, we'll outline our legislative objectives. And the first one is on the closing of the polls, and this came to us from the county auditors. And basically, this would call for all elections the polls would close at 8 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. And then Lucas, I'll turn it over to you for county infractions.
Yes, county infractions is a returning objective from our zoning affiliate, and this would basically allow the county to place on the property tax bill any fee that accumulated for the county working to abate or correct a violation of a county zoning ordinance. So when a property owner currently has those charges accumulate, it goes on the property as a lien, and the county then has to wait until the property is transferred to collect on that. This would allow that charge to be placed on the property tax, as it is now the case for nuisance and public health violations.
And next is on the First Responders Safety Act, and this would require utilities to temporarily stop service in mandatory evacuation zones to protect residents that do not leave those zones, and also to protect emergency personnel going into these zones. And next is on food safety. This has been a long time legislative objective for ISAC, as we've seen the food fees and the food inspection programs for county food inspection programs have been raised in several years. A lot of these programs are being reverted back to the Department of Inspection and Appeals. We would like to see those fees monitored so the counties could maintain those programs, as we believe that they provide a valuable safety interest for the residents of those counties.
The groundwater hazard statement formatting exemption is a new objective from our recorders. The groundwater hazard statement is a document that's required to be recorded. However, the form that is prescribed by the Department of Natural Resources does not comply with state requirements for recorded documents. So we're simply asking that that form be exempted from the formatting requirements for recorded documents. The Master Matrix Review Fee is a returning proposal from our zoning officials that would require a fee for the evaluation and the preliminary evaluation of new construction of concentrated animal feeding operations that are subject to the Master Matrix. A lot of work is put in before these are approved, and It is currently paid for with property taxes and other county funds and not paid for by the applicants. So this fee would help offset some of the cost of preparing for that application.
Next is on publishing resolutions, and this would allow for a summary of county resolutions to be published in local newspapers instead of the entire text, thus reducing county publishing costs. Next is the salary of the deputy county auditors, specifically the election deputy, and this would allow the election deputy to receive up to 85% of the salary of the auditor. As we've seen, the election deputy duties increase with HAVA and other election duties.
Security interest provisions is a returning objective from the treasurers. Iowa is among only a few states that require the signing on the title when a lien is released for a motor vehicle. And with other states doing this differently, out-of-state lenders are improperly releasing the lien with methods such as sending a form that they use in their state or a letter to the county treasurer. So this proposal would allow the state of Iowa to accept either a form, a letter, or the current practice of signing off on the title to be able to release a lien on a vehicle.
Next is on super speeders, and this comes to us from the Sheriffs and Deputies Association. As we've seen the instances of extreme speeding increase here in Iowa, and with the increase in citations and fatalities, what we are recommending is legislation that would, in all sections of the Iowa Code pertaining to reckless driving, add those speeders that exceed the speed limit by 25 miles an hour and above the posted speed limit, and include penalty provisions accordingly.
Tax increment financing is a returning objective from the county supervisors. Several ideas to address our tax increment financing law in Iowa. First, limit the number of years that a TIF district can exist. Currently, those districts that were established to address slum and blight and certain TIF districts designated for economic development that were created prior to January 1st, 1995 do not have a sunset date. Our proposal is to put in place a sunset for all TIF districts. Second, we would reestablish the base year or advance to the current valuation of the district if there is a renewal of the district or an expansion or changing of boundary lines of the district. Next, establishing a limit of less than 100% for the division of revenue. This would allow the other taxing entities that did not establish the TIF district to see some of the growth that is happening within the district rather than all of the revenue being diverted to the taxing entity that established the district. Next, requiring a fiscal impact statement to be prepared by the entity that sets up the district so that the other jurisdictions would know what impact they would have financially. Next, apply the rollback proportionally to both the base and the incremental valuation in a TIF district. Prohibit tax abatement within a TIF district. And finally, no use of revenue for government buildings or government properties that would not generally contribute to the property tax rolls. The title to abandoned property is a new proposal from the treasurers. Currently, when a city petitions to take over abandoned property, the treasurer releases, first refunds any tax sale that has occurred and then abates the property taxes that are due on that property. But this is done when the petition is filed, not when the city takes over the property. So if the city ultimately does not take over the property, the process for rebating on the tax sale and abating the property taxes has already occurred, creating pretty obvious problems. So this proposal would wait for the city to actually take title to the abandoned property before the abatement takes place. And finally, user fees is a returning objective. the marriage license fee, moving from $35 to $45, comes from the recorders. Currently, the county retains 4 of the $35. With this proposal, the additional $10 in the fee would be retained for a total of $14 retained by the county. Vital records fee, moving from a dollar amount to 40% of the fee set by administrative rule. And finally, a returning proposal from the treasurers on parking fine collection would allow the county to charge a $5 convenience fee for the county treasurer to collect unpaid and delinquent parking tickets.
Next, we'll identify some of the bill tracking tools that are available. What you have before you right now is located on the Iowa Legislature website, and where you can go on the left-hand side and click on Home to Legislation. There you can go and find legislation and track things as they go through the Senate and the House. Also, as you look above, you can find your legislators by clicking on one of the tabs above your local legislators, and also then the committees that they serve on as well. Next, this is the ISAC legislative bill tracking tool that's located on our website. And basically, what you have here is all the bills that are in the Senate and the House that pertaining to that are relevant to counties, and the staff assigned here at ISAC, and also the affiliates that are affected by this legislation, and also what the registration is that ISAC is on the bill, whether we are for, against, or if we're undecided. And next, this is how you can break it down by each of the various affiliates. And so, moving forward, we encourage all ISAC members to get involved in the legislative process, specifically also when they're in session. And so we encourage everyone to contact your legislator. We will be having again this year the County Day at the Capitol, which is on March 14th. And then also we encourage members to contact their legislator either through phone calls and through email. Also letters are also great as well. And also the legislature is in session mostly between Monday and Thursday during the week. And then on Friday and Saturday, they have legislative forums back in their districts. And we encourage all ISAC members to attend those legislative forums as well. And then, to let you know, if you don't know already, ISAC puts out a weekly legislative update on Friday. And we actively ask our members to provide legislative feedback in terms of relevant legislation that's coming before the Iowa General Assembly. And so, to kind of give you a brief forecast on what we're seeing already for the 2018 session, we look for it to be a quick session. They're scheduled to meet for 100 days this year. Last year, they were scheduled to meet 110 days, but because of the tight budget and so forth, they only met for 100 days. And we look for another tight session as well. If they don't meet 100 days, it'll probably be even less than that. And so on December 11th, we will have the Revenue Estimating Conference will meet, and those will provide the projections that will base the 2019 Iowa budget. So we'll be watching that closely to see how revenue is coming into the state. And with that, we'll just entertain any questions you might have.
And just as a reminder, you can type in your questions and we will receive those here. So on your screen, you should be able to see a chat bar where you can type in your questions.
Well, again, we want to thank you for joining us for this legislative webinar. As I said before, we actively encourage you to participate and contact your legislators during this upcoming session, and we want to wish each and every one of you a very happy holiday.